Good. All right. Well, my name's Katie Ringsmith. You do not have to refer to me as Dr. Ringsmith. Please don't refer to me as Dr. Ringsmith. As Pam mentioned, I teach at UAA. I teach both U.S. history and Alaska history, and I also teach in Eagle River, where I get, in many of my classes, I have the Mat-Su School District high school kids, and I am every day more and more impressed with those kids. So, which I think that means I'm pretty impressed with you all as teachers. And I'm also very impressed with you all because I have two little boys in the Anchorage School District, and they have an incredible experience. So, you know, thanks to you guys. They are in the first grade and the fourth grade. Although I work and live here in Anchorage, I spent a lot of time out in western Alaska, southwest Alaska. My father was the superintendent of a salmon cannery in Bristol Bay. So like the salmon, I migrated every summer from Washington and spent my summers in South Naknek. And I then moved upriver to Katmai National Park, where I worked as a park ranger, an interp ranger there at Katmai National Park. So that was an incredible experience, and that all led to my professional experience and career as a historian in Alaska. Historian. So as far as this class goes today, I'm going to be providing a presentation for you on the migrations, Alaska on the Move. Don't worry about taking a bunch of notes, because at the end of this class, not only will the PowerPoint be available to you, but every single word I say, all my notes will be provided to you as well. So hopefully that means, you know, if I'm going too fast, let me know. John, I'm sure will say slow down. But just know that if you missed something or you didn't quite catch something, you're going to have that information. But if you want me to elaborate, absolutely, please raise your hand and we'll try to answer those questions. Also, what will also be available to you besides the support readings is a ton of supplemental material, and you can use it as you want to, or you don't even have to pay attention to it. I've also, throughout this class, there are going to be a series of poll questions. We'll kind of see how that goes, but if you miss it, don't worry. They're just meant to be fun. Really, the only things we'll want to concentrate on are the two chats, and we'll get to that as we come upon them. I think, finally, it's what I think I can provide to you all is not only the content, but I am available to you to connect with other professional experts throughout the state, both in the cultural and historical community. Hopefully we can provide you, all sorts of material that you need, expertise, especially in the digital world, which makes things a lot easier these days. Also, if you have ideas for projects that could work in history, we could talk about, even funding and other ways to make these projects work. I can help you do that. I want to be able to help not just your classroom, but your community as well. And finally, I think what's really important is why I'm a historian in the first place. And I think it's actually very simple. There's one rule that I follow, and that is my responsibility to convey to you all the voices of the people who can't speak for themselves anymore. To do it in a way that is hopefully accurate and is contextual. So in other words, my job is not necessarily to pass judgment or to say what was good or bad about the past, but simply that it happened and how do we make sense of it today, and to ensure that those voices matter. So that's, I think, at the end of the day, why I'm a historian. So if there aren't any questions right away, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start tonight's lecture. So migrations, Alaska on the Move, and we're going to start going back with Beringia. Alaska's cultural heritage and its dynamic natural world are intrinsically entwined. The plants, the animals, seasons, even the land itself are constantly transforming, changing. Nature is always on the move. Vanguards who migrated across Beringia and who later settled in Alaska's diverse ecoregions were continually forced to adapt to the evolving natural systems. Successful adaptation allowed early Alaskans to survive, thrive, and to create culture. Innovation, technology, architecture, art, religion, even trade became expressive of distinct homelands. This deep connection to the land and water continues to present time and underscores the central role Alaska Natives play throughout Alaska history. So today's blending of hard science and traditional knowledge is shedding new light on the peopling of Alaska, a story that extends back over 10,000 years. Oops. So what are some of the big questions we're going to focus on in tonight's presentation? Well, what are Alaska's main ecoregions? What is the geological mechanism that formed and is still forming Alaska's diverse landscapes? How and when did humans first migrate to Alaska and the rest of the Western Hemisphere? And how did adaptation to the environment shape culture? How does Alaska's diverse environment impact Alaskans today? You can take me out of my video. Okay, just making sure. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about tonight. So this is kind of a breakdown of the presentation. We're going to first take a virtual tour over Alaska. I know that a lot of you guys have spent a lot of time teaching Alaska history, but Alaska is continental in size. And so some of us haven't been everywhere. So like a good book, you want to know the background, the setting, understand the action that's taking place. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes on a virtual tour. And then we're going to talk about the land itself, kind of the geological history of Alaska. We'll take about 10 minutes to do that. Then we're going to focus on sense of place. And why do Alaska historians need to know about the natural history? And we'll take about 5 minutes to chat about that. And then we're going to talk about Alaska's cultural landscape. How does Alaska's environment shape Alaska's cultures all the way up to today? And then we'll spend some time talking about the actual peopling of Alaska, from Beringia to the specific waves of migration and adaptation to those specific places that create Alaska's unique, distinct cultures. So today, over 500,000 square miles, 34,000 miles of tidal shoreline, 3 million lakes, countless rivers, and multiple mountain ranges form Alaska's rich mosaic of landscapes, some 32 ecoregions in all, which serve as year-round or seasonal havens for fish, wildlife, and people too. So what is an ecoregion? Well, an ecoregion is an area of land and water containing vegetation, communities that share species and ecological dynamics, environmental conditions, and interactions that are critical for their long-term persistence. So Alaska is an incredibly diverse place. So for us to appreciate and grasp its geological variations, its continental scale, the first thing we're going to do is take a little virtual tour. So here we are at the top of the world, adrift in the Arctic Ocean, and the first environmental feature we encounter is sea ice. Ice in the Arctic environment consists of shorefast or fast ice, as well as floating or pack ice. Pack ice persists year-round in the Arctic, while fast ice forms each winter and melts during the short Arctic summer. So here's your first question. Have you ever dipped your fingers in the Arctic Ocean? So go ahead, do the poll, and I'm going to keep going, so if you miss it, no problem. Why can't I get? So talk about movability. All sea ice is dynamic and mobile, subject to dispersal by winds and currents, and open water may persist year-round. 9 species of animals are strongly associated with the ice pack in Alaska, and some, such as polar bears and the ring seals, depend on ice year-round. And on our journey over Alaska, we also observe firsthand how climate change is threatening the sea ice and its associated critters. Now, moving on to shore, our visual landscape is dominated now by the tundra environment that appears to stretch to the sky and beyond. Small lakes dot the Arctic coastal plain. All right, there's another one. Go for it.
What was the first? That was the first.
Or second one. Yeah, second one, sorry. So low shrubs, mosses, sedges, lichen, blanket the Brooks foothills, as well as the rolling terraces and valleys of the Seward Peninsula. This is a landscape transformed by ice ages. Over time, the Bering Sea, the Bering Strait, the Chukchi Sea incrementally pushed the shorelines inland, and later retreated, leaving behind ancient beaches that rippled the landscape. Blooming flowers and fall colors paint western Alaska, and ice wedges cut the landscape into strange yet beautiful geometric-like patterns. The word tundra derives from the Finnish word tunturi, treeless heights. It refers to treeless ecosystems where winters are long and cold and summers are short and often chilly. Those conditions are found both in the high latitudes and also atop high mountain plains. The high latitude tundra that we encounter on our journey is called Arctic tundra or lowland tundra. But as we head into the Brooks Range, the high altitude tundra we observe covering the mountaintop is called alpine tundra. So one of the first environmental features we notice about Alaska's Arctic and subarctic ecoregions is that seasonal changes are dramatic here. In midsummer, the tundra landscape is bathed in nearly 24 hours of sunlight. Anyone? Anyone?
Don't have that one.
Don't have that one, sorry. In winter, the pole tilts further and further from the sun. Days shorten and shorten until midwinter, when north of the Arctic Circle, the sun fails to rise above the horizon at all. So if we were there tonight in January, our journey to the Arctic tundra will probably be a little chilly, but a potentially beautiful experience. Another environmental condition we encounter is the region's aridity, where whether it's summer or winter, Alaska's tundra gets very little snow or rain. So to us, the region may appear as a cold desert. Annual precipitation at Barrow, located on the tundra-covered coastal plain, is around 4 inches, far less than annual rainfall of the Mojave Desert. Plus, we can feel down to our core the ceaseless affront of the wind. The contrast in temperature between the land and the ocean creates persistent breezes that sweep across the treeless landscape. These winds can pose challenges for life. Wind dries and chills and can pick up dust and snow and debris, scouring any exposed plant or animal tissue. So, anybody ever experienced those willy-wahs, those little localized windstorms? They're pretty crazy. Oops. However, some tundra plants and animals are specially adapted to minimize wind damage. And some animals actually seek out wind-scoured areas where travel is easier and foraging plants are more accessible. So, as we leave our Alaska's northern and western regions, we're going to move towards the tundra-covered, as we leave north and western tundra-covered coastal regions, and we're going to turn inland towards the interior. And we begin to see a dramatic transition as boreal forests of spruce, birch, aspen, and cottonwood cover the landscape. Alaska's boreal forest, sometimes called the taiga, is often portrayed as a monotonous blanket of spindly, Charlie Brown-like evergreens covering the hills and valleys of the far north. But if we look closer, we'll see the boreal forest ecoregion is far more complex. Right? Ask the inhabitants in Fairbanks, and they'll confirm that cold weather shapes this ecosystem. In fact, it's the coldest terrestrial ecosystem on Earth. Long winters, permafrost, even forest fires all contribute to the tapestry of Alaska's boreal forests. Yeah, I went to school there. I paid my dues. So heading into the forest, we see the black spruce and the white spruce, which are the most common conifers of this huge ecosystem. But then balsam poplar, the paper birch, the aspens pop from the dark green forests. Whoops.
My bad.
Okay. Especially on the south-facing, recently disturbed sites such as river bars and recent burns. Autumn foliage paints the boreal forest in hues of green, yellow, orange, and reds. Yeah, I take that question from personal experience. You can get lost very quickly in the boreal forest. So the arrival of winter transforms the forest scene into what appears a black and white photograph. You feel like Dorothy in Kansas sometimes. On our journey into the boreal forest, we are first confronted with this pungent smell of willow, highbush, cranberries, alder, rose, Labrador tea, blueberries. The forest maintains this vibrant understory. The ground cover plants that grow beneath our feet, the mosses, the lichens, the grasses, the sedges, the low brush cranberries. And then horsetail, a plant that's been around since the days of the dinosaurs, shimmers in the long Arctic light. So shaping the contours of this landscape are countless rivers and lakes, enormously important components of Alaska's boreal forest ecosystem. Alaska has more than 12,000 rivers and 3 million lakes greater than 5 acres, not to mention countless creeks and ponds. Annual migrations of salmon of the Yukon, Kuskokwim, Bristol Bay, Copper River watersheds bring ocean nutrients into the interior, enriching riparian zones which feed eagles, bears, and wolves and humans. Lush riparian areas are important to insects eating songbirds in summer, and willow ptarmigan, snowshoe hare, and moose in winter. These massive rivers also serve as travel corridors for both people and wildlife, creating networks of water connections throughout the interior country. As rivers move across the landscape, they erode into sediments along sections of their banks, and they deposit these sediments elsewhere. And some of these great rivers are fed by thousands of glacial tributaries, creating networks of water connections that connect people to other places. And glaciers are, in fact, rivers of ice, but don't be fooled. Glaciers are moving too, and are some of the landscape's most significant sculptors. And as we journey to Alaska's eastern boundary, below us we witness a sea of ice, a massive ice field formed by storms of the relentless North Pacific and the rising St. Elias Range and the volcanic Wrangell Mountains. The Wrangell Mountains, standing as sentinels of volcanic and glaciated splendor, commands our view of Alaska's eastern skyline. So have you ever caught a salmon from the Copper River? So snaking from these mountain ranges is the most extensive glacial system in North America. The stark divide between the wet, cold climate of the coast and the dry, cold of the interior, combined with the high mountain environment, create enormous snow accumulations from which drain some of the longest temperate glaciers in the world. It takes a pilot flying a small aircraft nearly 1 hour to cross the Malaspina Glacier, the world's longest Piedmont glacier, which at its width is 45 miles across. This country was and still is dangerous. As Walter A. Wood, a UAF geologist, noted, these glaciarized high mountain ranges were, by their very nature, unsympathetic to human invasion. So any pilots out there? I wrote a book about aviation, but I'm actually terrified to fly. Don't like it. So as isolated as this icy region appears, the land was never empty. Flowing life into this eternally frozen landscape is the Great Copper River, creating a massive watershed that is home to Dall sheep, caribou, bison, moose, bear, and people. The flow of water from this massive river system produced at its mouth of the Copper River Delta, the largest contiguous wetland along North America's Pacific coast. It used annually by 16 million shorebirds, including the world's entire population of western sandpipers, the world's largest population of nesting trumpeter swans, and the only known nesting site for the dusky Canada goose. Anybody ever been to the Shorebird Festival? I actually never have, but I would love to go. I think that would be awesome. So, Alaska's rivers, lakes, and permafrost contribute to Alaska's wetland habitats, which make up 43.3% of the state's surface area. That's a lot. That's like almost half. Significant wetlands also occur along the large interior river systems, including the Yukon, Kuskokwim, Koyukuk, Stikine, and Colville rivers. And despite the low rainfall, Alaska's tundra is also rich in wetlands. This is because the permafrost acts as an impenetrable layer under the thin tundra soil and traps moisture close to the surface. These conditions make Arctic tundra a complex mosaic of dry and wet sites. Wetlands are also associated with Alaska's coastal temperate rainforests, which help differentiate forests of southeast Alaska from most forests of the rest of the United States. So as we continue on our journey, we plunge southward to the southeastern Alaskan Panhandle. Here, western hemlock, Sitka spruce, mountain hemlock, and Alaska's yellow cedar, old growth of the Tongass, dominates the landscape. From overhead, it's easy to see that this is a naturally fragmented rainforest. Its glaciated river valleys, bordered by steep ice fields, divide the thin strip of coastline. Below are hundreds of islands of varying sizes, which constitute the Alexander Archipelago. Gaps of clear cuts are rare and are usually the result of windstorms rather than loggers. Large-scale fires never burned on the Tongass. This is an ancient landscape. The rainforest is extraordinarily complex and stable habitat. Over 1,000 years, many wildlife species and some of the largest indigenous populations evolved to exploit this habitat. This is also a rare ecoregion, for temperate rainforests like the Tongass occur only 6 places on Earth outside of Alaska. So anybody been to Sitka and the National Historic Park there? It is truly a very cool place. So as we follow Alaska's coastline westward, we begin to notice a couple of things about this habitat. Well, one, it's pretty varied and vast. At 44,000 miles, Alaska's shoreline is more than double the length of America's continental coast combined, providing an abundance of habitats for marine life. Up close, we can see tide pools, eelgrass beds, kelp beds, mudflats that support a vast assemblage of birds and vertebrates, foraging fish, and marine mammals. 50 million seabirds nest on the Alaska coast each summer, and more than 100 species of corals form in the cold water reefs that are comparable in size to the better known tropical reefs. First, we move over Prince William Sound, which encompasses 3,800 miles of coastline, bounded to the east and north by the Chugach Mountains and to the west by the Kenai Peninsula. We witness an abundance again of this marine and coastal life, the rainforests, the Sitka spruce, the western hemlock, the glacier-studded landscape, and among the estimate 200,000 seabirds that summer in the Sound are marbled murrelets, black-legged kittiwakes, seagulls, and we see both the black and the brown bears. We see moose and mountain goats. Swimming in the deep waters are the resident marine mammals, humpbacks, fins, orca whales, stellar sea lions, harbor seals, sea otters, all of which reach some of their greatest numbers in the Prince William Sound. Yeah, anybody ever take a cruise, see some of those whales? Well, they're all now in Maui, our whales. I would like to be there. So, moving further to the west, we come to the Kodiak Island archipelago, which extends from the Barren Islands to the north to Chilkat Islands and the Samiti Island group to the south. Mountainous terrain, dissected by fjords and deep river valleys, carved by ancient glaciers, again command our view. The island group represents a transitional line between habitats that divide Sitka spruce on Afognak Island with the rolling tundra of the Aluluik Peninsula. On Kodiak, second largest only to the island of Hawaii in the United States, we experience an essential migration of breeding habitat for eagles and especially bears, especially a distinct type of bear, the Kodiak brown bear, the largest brown bear in the country. So have you ever met a bear in the wild? I'm sure some of you have. Just remember, don't put your garbage out until the next day. Okay, so at this point, we drop to the southwest, moving along the Alaska Peninsula Pacific coast, where those grizzly bears are out there looking for razor clams. And then to the Aleutian Islands and beyond to the Pribilof Islands as we begin to end our journey. So along the way, we're going to witness the sedimentary islands, environmental makers, the spectacular steaming peaks. In fact, we have just flown over the largest concentration of active volcanoes in the world. The Aleutian Island tundra ecoregion is covered with a dense growth of shrubs and grasses, including crowberries, sedges, many flowering plants. And these islands support many seabird colonies of extraordinary size and global importance. The Pribilof Islands, for example, provide breeding habitat for 3 million seabirds, including virtually all the world's 250,000 red-legged kittiwakes. Many of the islands also support endemic species, including the Pribilof Island shrew and the Aleutian shield fern. So watch your step here. This is the only federally listed endangered plant in Alaska. But unlike the Arctic tundra, these large islands receive more precipitation, plus it's warmer here, making the islands a lush habitat. But similar to the far north, the wind never stops blowing here in the Aleutian Island chain, as they say, is the birthplace of the wind. All right, so that was our little overview of Alaska. So now we're going to shift gears here and talk a little bit about the land itself, because it's not just the animals and it's not just the people who are in motion. And as this weekend, a little earthquake reminded us here in Anchorage that the land too is moving and has actually come from someplace else. So besides migrating wildlife, the shifting climate, the changing seasons, geologists inform us that the land is moving. For much of the formation constituting those 32 regions we just talked about, these places all came from someplace else. Save a small, knotty margin of the North American continent, Alaska consists of several geological units called terranes, formed in faraway places, and each terrain moved great distances over time. So most of Alaska was shaped by millions of years ago by a mix of geological deposits that drifted northward at different points in time. The terrain containing alien rock, not to mention copper and gold, collided and slowly and incrementally extended the ancient North American continental margin. And this process, of course, can be a little messy. So let's see, where's my little arrow here? Oh.
Click where you want it.
Okay, there you go. So if you take note of where that little green arrow is pointing, you see kind of the dark formation on the bottom and the lighter formation on top. Well, that lighter formation is limestone, and it was formed in an ancient seabed somewhere down there by the equator, whereas the basaltic, the darker rock, is volcanic in origin, and it too came from somewhere down there at the equator. And these formations, these deposits, eventually collided to each other and overlapped. So the question becomes, why is the geological story important? Why do historians care about that? Do you believe Alaska's geological story is germane to its human story? Well, just take note of that because we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And I hope you all said yes, because it's super important, because in that formation drifted the most purest and richest copper deposit in the world, in which Kennecott Copper Corporation was able to exploit, and because of that, that copper was became the telephone lines that connected Americans all throughout the country and eventually the world. So it's an incredibly important part of the historical story. So yes, traveling with this rock is things like copper and gold, and it is germane absolutely to our story. So the question that I want to ask now is this, what is the geological force moving Alaska terrains? And that, of course, is plate tectonics. I'm not a geologist, so I'm going to give you the most simplest version of this story that I can. So the Earth's surface is like a big jigsaw puzzle. It is made up of fragmented mobile plates, and these immense crustal plates are pulled apart in the ocean basin and move away from the mid-ocean in a conveyor belt-like fashion, approximately 2 to 3 centimeters a year, about the same rate as our fingernails grow. And as the plates separate, the Earth's mantle below the rift rises upward to fill the gap. And progression of the plates may seem slow by us human perspectives, but that seafloor spreading over the past 100 to 200 million years has caused little inlets to grow into oceans and continents to rip apart. As plates spread, they inevitably collide into each other. And when this occurs, the heavier oceanic plate descends beneath the lighter, less dense continental plate, creating what geologists call the subduction zone. This is Latin for carried under, subduction. So where the oceanic plate begins its plunge, some of the continental plate is dragged under with it, and this makes a deep trench in the ocean bed. So lying southwest off the coast of Alaska is the Aleutian Trench, which descends nearly 5 miles below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. The Aleutian Trench is where the Pacific plate is subducting below the North American plate. So we have a little volcanic question. Did you know that Nova Erupta, Latin for new eruption, created the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, was also the largest eruption in the 20th century? The subduction process has built Alaska's biggest mountains. Denali, Mount St. Elias, these are examples of mountains that were created through the geological uplift. Over 20,000 feet, Denali is still moving skyward. St. Elias, the second highest peak in North America, is the product of 10 million years of plate tectonics. So as the oceanic plate subducts underneath the continental plate, it rises up and pushes these mountains skyward. And as that subducted plate descends, the heat from the Earth's interior begins to melt it, and buoyant liquid magma rises to the surface, which forms these distinct lines of coastal volcanic ranges. But also, as subduction drags huge quantities of ocean water into the Earth's interior, it heats up, creates steam. And what happens when water heats up? Steam builds pressure, and just like opening a pop bottle that you shook up, boom, on an occasion, it explodes. So volcanoes are a product of what scientists call the subduction factory. Alaska serves as the apex of an aptly cold ring of fire which circles the Pacific Rim. The Aleutian Trench Oh. Yeah, Stephanie, you're totally right. Absolutely. Anwar. Salmon. You guys are going very quickly, so bear with me. But yes, absolutely. You guys totally are getting it. I guess we don't have to go anymore in the lecture. You already know. I'm totally kidding. Okay. All right. So let's just take a few more minutes, and then we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the historical perspective on this. I can't breathe with my breath. Absolutely. Environment defines culture, way of life. You guys are totally. And I think, a lot of you guys are firsthand experts on this. I mean, you live it, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So just so you know, when I developed these lectures, the audience I had in my head was likely the person who just came to Alaska, the teacher who might just be teaching this for the very first time. So if, I'm talking about things that you guys know innately, just kind of bear with me. But also, it's, these are questions that, just sometimes because they seem so obvious, those are the things that we really do want to concentrate on the most on, because those are the things that matter the most. All right, so let's just go ahead and we'll talk a little bit about sense of place. You guys, so a lot of people come to Alaska to recreate. military, they like to retire here so they can hunt and fish and ski, go berry picking. We love to do these kind of things. So you better know your place to prepare for the conditions, right? You don't want to get lost. You don't want to get hurt out there. You don't want to fall in the water and not know how to take care of yourself. You got to know where you're going, and you got to know how to get back. And so these are all precautions that we need to know about the land. So that's just one reason, and that speaks to safety reasons, right? You want to make sure you're safe. But there's also, beyond the individual, there's a collective reason for that. We live, again, in this place that's very volatile. The earthquake woke us all up at 7.1 this weekend to remind us that the land is here and is not going away anytime soon. And so we have, agencies and professionals who keep an eye out for us and really know. They study those volcanoes. They know when they're going to erupt. We have geologists who are focusing and watching those earthquakes to ensure we don't have a tsunami that could devastate the coastal regions. And remember the Mount Redoubt that erupted just not that long ago. These are all environmental conditions that affect us to this day. Historically, as we move deeper into history, there's strategic reasons for knowing one's place. Alaska's proximity to Russia during World War II and the Cold War made it central to significant efforts of war and defense, such as Lend-Lease, and later detecting nuclear threats. There's political reasons for knowing one's environment, and you guys picked that up with ANWR pretty quickly, right? Environmental issues has fueled political action in our history. From John Muir, Teddy Roosevelt, the Tanana Chiefs Conference, to Project Chariot and the rise of Alaska's modern environmental movement, to Tundra Times and the passage of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act in 1980. Indeed, Alaska's environment has played a big role in shaping our political history. And no brainer here, but knowing one's land is important to our economy. Alaska's economy today, as well as in the past, is based on natural resource extraction, from the fur trade, the polar whaling fishery, canned salmon, the gold rush, copper, timber, to the discovery of Prudhoe Bay oil and the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. But also, there's an artistic expression obviously manifest in the background of great stories, for example. Think about authors like Jack London. He made Alaska's nature, its wildness, the main character of his books. Call the Wild, To Build a Fire. Poets like John Haynes captures the essence of Alaska's unique environment in his poetry. The natural world serves as both motif and material in Alaska Native artwork. And there are also global connections. Knowing one's place. We are a place where our position in the globe matters. Alaska is part of two great geopolitical regions, the circumpolar north and the Pacific Rim. We exist in a global community that shares similar indigenous cultures. Pacific currents connect us via whales, earthquake debris, and climate change. Motivating William Seward to purchase Alaska, and what the Secretary of State saw of the northern appendage was not necessarily the resources here, but he saw Alaska as a stepping stones to Asia. Placing Alaska within the broader context of the Earth history connects us dinosaurs to Prudhoe Bay oil. It recognizes salmon as post-Ice Age colonizers. And it reminds us that all the gold in Alaska came from a dying star. A global perspective also shows us, historically speaking, that from Beringia to Alaska's 100-language city, we all arrived from someplace else. These aren't new phenomenons. This is something that is deep. And finally, it is important to know our natural history because a global perspective challenges rather outdated historical interpretations or explanations of who we are and how we got here. Think of the last frontier narrative. Alaska is not the end of the road. It's not the bridge to nowhere. Instead, Alaska is the bridge, which has served as a geological, ecological, and cultural crossroads. Indeed, our history shows that we are people on the move. So now that we've spent some time looking at Alaska's vast and varied environments, let's now look at the people who inhabited and still inhabit those places. Before contact, no Alaskan thought about the environment as distinct from culture. There was no concept of wilderness or civilization, no world of nature that existed separately from a world of people. These are lines that are created by people. They are human constructions. We invented them. Linguists, along with cultural bearers, tell us that the importance of place is implicit in Alaska Native language and culture. Wisdom, as one cultural expert put it, sits in places. So to illustrate, let's just look at a few Dena'ina place names that Shem Pete writes about in his work with Jim Fall. For the Dena'ina who lived and still live in Takotnu or the Cook Inlet region, their word for the west point of Fire Island means swirling water, which is a little bit more description and lets you know what's going on there, especially for people who get around those areas in boats, watercraft. Their place name for Potter's Marsh means Drift Lumber Creek. And the place name for an area surrounding the Turnagain neighborhood that had basically fell into the inlet during the '64 earthquake, that place name translates to rotten land. The name of a mountain near Potter's Marsh, possibly what we know as Suicide Peak, means where we kill Alutiiq people. So again, a little bit of history embedded in place. To the Anungan or the Aleut people, the first Alaska natives to encounter the Russian newcomers, the word Alaska didn't mean great land, which some tourist companies still talk about, but rather for people who carved out a pretty good life on the tiny volcanic island that makes up the Aleutian chain. From this perspective, the word Alaska translated to mean where the place where the sea waves crash upon themselves. In other words, it was the mainland. It was the place that wasn't the islands. So obviously, it's vital for the survival of Alaska Natives that they know their homeland. Diligent observation and keen sense of place provided people with information such as where and how do we gather all the food that we need to get, the materials and know-how on how to build shelter to keep us warm, and clothing that protected us from the harsh elements, while at the same time honoring the creatures that shared that environment. So knowledge embedded in place names conveyed and passed down information from generation to generation. And to an oral-based society, place names served as mental maps. They served as history. They served as ways to conduct behavior and knowing where to go. Place names help people to interpret, understand, and explore around them. And such knowledge certainly helped to capture prey that was moving too. Overall and intellectual expression of environmental information sparked art, religion, language, technology, politics, hence the creation of Alaska's distinct cultures, which indeed are shaped by the distinct ecoregions people eventually chose to inhabit. Skills displayed function in a high degree of artistic expression. Aleut basket weaving. Alutiiq hats designed to both hide the hunter and honor that prey. Ingenious Inupiaq snow goggles. You don't want to get snow blinded out there. the Tlingit people's complex clan lineage. Art expressed how Alaska's indigenous people engaged in ceremony and war and trade. Those beads certainly came from someplace else. And most significantly, each distinct cultural expression is manifest in the land itself. So I really love to hear from you, all of you teachers, especially those of you who are living in Western Alaska. How does Alaska's land and water shape life in Alaska today, our relationship to that land and water? So take about 5 minutes to talk a little bit about that question. And certainly your personal experience is fantastic to include. Okay, these are really excellent responses. I'm trying to keep up. Yeah, I mean, it's everything, right? I mean, it's almost hard to say in a few words or sentences just how important this relationship is to us. Although I would like to have a little bit more snow here in Anchorage to improve my skiing lifestyle. Yeah, I love the travel stuff. That's absolutely, and that's seasonal too, isn't it? You guys are expressing that, absolutely. Excellent. Okay, so these are excellent responses. So I'm very glad that we're making sense of what I'm talking about. That's always encouraging. All right. So yes, the stereotype. Most people today know that, like Native Americans, there's not just one monolithic Alaska Native. The word Eskimo, like Indian, shares a similar complicated history. Although the name Eskimo is commonly used in Alaska to refer to all Inuit and Yupik people, this name is considered derogatory because it was given by non-Inuit people, and it was said to mean eater of raw meat. Well, linguists at UAF now believe that that's really not true, that the word Eskimo derives from the Ojibwayan word meaning to net snowshoes, which isn't so horrible, but nevertheless, it's still a word, it's still a term that is loaded and it has a history. And I think anybody teaching Alaska studies really needs to be aware of this. Alaska Natives, especially the younger generation, recognize how this word has been used to either exotify or to discriminate, discriminate against them. So no matter their cultural association, they were called this word to separate them. Usually, however, older Alaskans continue to accept the term Eskimo. And other younger generations, they're reinventing and they're reclaiming and they're taking that word back. But I still think, generally speaking, most people prefer distinctions between Inupiaq and Yupik people. Similarly, we are seeing the same generational preference between Aleut and Unungan too. So this is, and I think it's always just good to just ask people, what is the proper term? Because the reality is this is tough. Historically, there's been a lot of different names and terms, whether it's the Russians or the anthropologists or who had given these names. So just ask. It never hurts. And it gets very confusing pretty quickly because there's 20 distinct languages, over 20 distinct languages spoken by indigenous people who constitute Alaska's cultural landscape. Each group came to North America at different times. They came from different regions. They even moved in different directions. Whether it be by boot or boat, they likely utilized different modes of transportation. And importantly, they adapted to the various environments we just toured in very distinct ways. So this is kind of a rhetorical question here. Do you think Alaska's cultural variety reflects the process of adapting to a vast and varied environment? Well, yes, absolutely, right? I don't think anybody could say no. Just in reflecting that map, just of where these groups are, the Inupiaq reside along the Arctic coastal plain in the Seward Peninsula. Yupik, the St. Lawrence Yupik, they reside in the salmon country of western Alaska. Several Athabascan-speaking groups inhabit the boreal forested and river-penetrated interior. The culturally similar, yet linguistically divergent Haida, Tlingit, and Tsimshian occupy the temperate rainforests of southeast. The Eyak, Supiaq, Alutiiq people, they dwell along the maritime coast, and the Aleut or Unungan continue to thrive on the storm-besieged lower Alaska Peninsula and the volcanic Aleutian chain. So each of these cultures is distinct, with complex kinship structure, highly developed subsistence hunting and gathering practices and technologies, and unique and varied languages, belief systems, art, music, storytelling, spirituality, dance traditions, among a whole bunch of other attributes. So in the last part of class tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about how humans originally came to Alaska, how they became culturally diverse, and at least in part, we're going to talk about how Alaska's cultural variety really reflects the process of adapting to a diverse environment. Okay. Take a breath. All right, the peopling of Alaska, the crossroads of continents. So often in my field, historians refer to Alaska as a young state. I'm sure we've all heard that. We just celebrated our 50-year anniversary of statehood. We're coming up on our 150-year anniversary of the Alaska Purchase. And, the rest of the states, places like Europe, they all say, oh, you're just so young. But the reality is we are not. Alaska maintains an ancient history steeped in what John McPhee called deep time. So any of you guys that teach Alaska or U.S. history, this should be a familiar scene. American history traditionally emphasizes a Western movement, right? Go West, young man. We talk about the pioneers. The national migration routes and trends to the West that so much defines who we are as Americans. But what I love to remind my students is that the land bridge made Alaska an access point, a gateway through which human beings entered, traveled, and inhabited the New World, but it served also as a homeland whose descendants inhabited both Siberia and Alaska. So Beringia contains a deep history that immediately brings Alaska into the realm of world history. So for hundreds and hundreds of generations, a different group of Asiatic pioneers moved the American frontier southward and eastward. It wasn't always just about the West. Typically known as the northwest corner of the New World, 15,000 years ago, Alaska was once geographically part of Asia. The landmass formed as various stages of advancing and retreating glaciers caused water levels to fluctuate, periodically exposing the ocean floor and thus creating an ice-free corridor of land that scientists named Beringia, an expanse that extends from approximately the Yenzi River in Siberia to the Yukon River in North America. Between possibly 28,000 and 17,000 years ago, during what scientists call the last glacial maximum, temperatures dropped to intensely cold levels, causing people to move from the most inhospitable places of Siberia. It's presumed that the ice sheets prevented movement into the North American continent until climate warmed about 16,000 to 10,000 years ago. So this was just a little tidbit I came across. That process, that frontier process, actually helped give Homo sapiens a leg up. It helped us grow bigger brains. It helped us to adapt to this inhostile environment. The Neanderthal guys, they didn't make the trip. And it wasn't quite like, the bridge is open, woohoo, let's go, everybody race on. It wasn't quite like that. Most human beings didn't move more than about 5 miles in an entire lifetime. So this was a very long process. Current research suggests that the ancestors of the first Americans held up in Beringia for about 5,000 to 10,000 years before continuing into North America. This is fascinating. That means they weren't Asians anymore, nor were they Native Americans yet. They were Beringians. They had their own DNA. They were their own people. And although direct evidence of who these people were is really scarce, we know they consumed a broad-based northern diet of large mammals, birds, some fish. They carried with them tools like sewing needles and the knowledge to construct habitation, which allowed them to survive in these cold environments. And we are constantly knowing more because thanks to the climate warming right now, things are just falling out of interior Alaska. And so Fairbanks archaeologists at UAF and in places like the National Park Service are just, in awe of what they are discovering every single day. So this is a story that is constantly changing. The story itself is in motion. And besides archaeology, cultural anthropologists are providing us with evidence, pointing to examples of oral tradition that has also stories that have made the transition from Asia into North America. Raven stories, for example, were transferred from the old world to the new. Geneticists are getting into the mystery-solving process as well, looking at how early humans spread their DNA across continents. So what was so attractive about Beringia? Well, for one thing, it was an ice age with no ice. On a given summer day, approximately 16,000 years ago, if we could go to the middle of the Bering Sea, we'd see a herd of elk moving through the now vanished Beringian lowlands, nosing through small woody shrubs like crowberries and Labrador tea. And if we looked off to the west, we'd see grassy plains, maybe some horses or some mammoths, caribou, even maybe a camel wandering through patches of wildflowers. Some of these large mammals might become prey for cave lions, saber-toothed tigers, that great short-faced bear. Scientists describe Beringia as a lost world when climate warmed and mammoths, woolly rhinos, and most of the megafauna vanished along with the glacial era vegetation that sustained them. Not to mention that the central Beringian lowlands were drowned about 10,500 years ago when melting ice raised sea levels. But although some of all those charismatic megafauna became extinct, 2 Alaskan survivors of the Pleistocene remain: the musk ox and the wood bison. And I just love those musk ox. They're just so cool. I like bison too, but it also is neat because they're reintroducing bison back to these areas. So that's an even cooler story. So the other thing is that Beringia isn't necessarily a lost world. Parts of the ancient Beringian landscape remain. And only in Alaska, this is very unique about Alaska because the rest of the Beringian world has been developed and it has changed. But here in Alaska, we maintain ancient sites. So if you went to one, you could still look out and see a landscape the very first humans into the New World might have gazed upon. And it really hasn't changed that much. A little warming and a little uplift, and that's about it. So how do we know all of this? Well, humans have wondered for a very long time the origins of global populations. Not long after the so-called discovery by Europeans, Jose de Acosta first asked the question, well, how did people come to inhabit this new world? Even Wilhelm Steller, in his very brief time in Alaska, he noticed and found iron knives and correctly assumed that they came from the Chukchi in Siberia. Thomas Jefferson studied native sites in Monticello, and he would eventually conclude that American Indians and Northern Asians probably had a common origin. But the problem that all these pundits confronted was that they couldn't explain their theories within the constraints of biblical time. What's going to change all that is the rise of geology as a discipline and a really important discovery of mammoth bones on the Pribilof Islands, right? These are islands, but they weren't always islands. They actually were the center of the Beringian continent. So in 1892, common belief after this discovery shifts. And at the turn of the century, the Jesup North Pacific Expedition was sent to prove the Great Migration theory. Expedition scientists systematically studied the cultural, racial, and linguistic attributes of people living in the greater North Pacific region. This is a massive place. Franz Boas, the leader of the expedition, was concerned that cultures on both sides of the North Pacific would soon be lost to colonialization and acculturation. There was a sense of urgency to determine where these so-called vanishing people came from before it was too late. The Jesup expedition covered a huge study area that extended like a giant arc from the northwest coast of North America to the Bering Strait and along the Pacific coast of Siberia to the cultural borderlands of China, Korea, and Japan. The investigation was the first to scientifically approach the question and prompted new questions about the peopling of North America. And solving the problem would inspire a century of research in North America conducted by geologists like Dave Hopkins, who spent decades studying the Bering Land Bridge in Alaska, even coined the term Beringia in the 1970s. And then archaeologists like Jim Dixon and Tim Heaton, whose work at sites like On Your Knees Cave suggests that glaciers retreated quickly along the northwest coast. Therefore, migration routes may also have been maritime, not just terrestrial. Today, current models working to reconstruct the Beringian landscape include expertise from archaeologists, geneticists, paleoecologists, and linguists. And I think also what's very important here is that instead of studying indigenous people of the Pacific like specimens, something they need to save, Today, scientists are collaborating with Native people, seeking ways to ground truth scientific theory. For example, they are working to mark an east-west trail of commonalities that include language, biocoastal salmon ceremonies. For example, the Ainu, the indigenous people of Japan, have a very similar first salmon ceremony that is conducted by the Tlingit people here in Southeast Alaska. They also look to oral tradition. There's not a tremendous amount of oral history that speaks specifically to Beringia, but there are a few. The Haida people talk about a woman who the children teased, and she wasn't very happy about that, so she made the waters rise, and they kept rising, and they kept rising. And everybody died, except for the people who were in canoes and boats, and those people became the first Haida. It's also important to note that not everybody thinks they came across on the land bridge. There's Athabascan groups, for example, who they say, no, we have our own creation story. They reject the Bering Land Bridge theory. And for a long time, scientists said, well, that's just silly, that's just myth, that's fairy tale, think what you want. Until the linguists started getting into the picture. And what's fascinating is that they recognize that Athabascan speakers in Alaska can converse with the Apache and the Navajo people of the southwestern part of the United States. This is extraordinary when you think that Tlingit and Haida are completely divergent languages, and these are people with almost identical cultural connections, but the Athabascan people can converse. And not only people of Alaska, but also those root words can be found in Siberia as well. So they are finding a language trail. So what they're saying and explaining is that it's very likely that it wasn't just a one-way street. People probably came from Southwest and moved their way up and through Canada, and as the ice corridors opened following game. So this was a way in which the science was ground truth by the oral tradition, and it's very important that it's respected and recognized. So we know humans crossed the continents and inhabited both North and South America, but how and when did they come to inhabit Alaska and then diverge into these 20 distinct groups? Well, again, I'm not a geologist, nor am I an archaeologist. So much of my information that I'm presenting you tonight comes from Aaron Kroll, who's the curator of the Smithsonian Institute's gallery at the Anchorage Museum. So according to Kroll, about 15,000 years ago, the first wave of New World migration was represented by groups of small hunter-gatherers. These pioneers were ancestral to the well-known Clovis culture of North America. Sites associated with this group have been found along the Nenana and the Tanana rivers in the Brooks Range and elsewhere in the interior. The oldest dates so far are about 12,000 years ago. Other associated sites, such as the one found along Alaska's coast, some of those are like 10,000 years ago, which is pretty cool because they're underwater. So people who left behind these small clues, they may have been the ancestors to the Haida and the Tsimshian and the other contemporary cultures of the northwest coast. So the theory is that the glaciers were retreating pretty fast along the Pacific coast. The second wave of migration includes the Paleo-Arctic people who came from Beringia and moved into both Siberia and Alaska about 12,000 years ago. So this is what we're talking about when we were talking about the Athabascan explanation. So they eventually settled in mainland Alaska, the eastern Aleutian Islands, Kodiak, and the Yukon Territory and British Columbia, and as far south as Vancouver Island. And again, they probably took a route that went all the way down and they came all the way back up again. So, oh shoot, let me just go back here. I missed that one. So this territory coincides with area occupied by the contemporary Nadena speakers, so it's likely that the Athabascans, Eyak, and the Tlingit are Paleo-Arctic descendants, and that also explains not only the Apache-Navajo connection, but also explains why Haida and Tlingit are so disconnected. They're not related as root languages. It's possible that this second migration also included refugees who were fleeing catastrophic eruptions, such as the White River volcano near the Alaska-Canada border. Radiocarbon dated to about 720 AD. Athabascan oral tradition tells of volcanic eruptions at the beginning of time, which triggered populations eastward into Canada. So yeah, place changes history for sure. The third wave of migration and interaction across Bering Straits began about 4,500 years ago, when people possessing a new and varied technology known as the Arctic Small Tool arrived in northwestern Alaska and rapidly spread across Canada to Greenland to occupy previously uninhabited areas of the high Arctic. The series of cultures that emerged on both sides of the Bering Strait were ancestral to the modern Alaskan Inuit people of the region, with southern counterparts developing in the Inungan and Supiaq areas. Their languages were early forms of Eskimo Aleut, and again, another environmental causation, the split of these two groups likely occurred with a massive eruption of the Aniakchak volcano and subsequent flooding caused by the draining of an ancient lake about 1,000 meters deep, which created the Aniakchak caldera, smack in the middle of the Alaska Peninsula, which just happens to split two language groups. So did you know that this eruption created a cultural and biological dead zone that lasted 1,000 years? So that would explain, at least theoretically, why these languages are separated. Finally, about 1,000 years ago, Inuit living around the Bering Strait, referring to now to the Thule culture, this is when they began to hunt the bowhead whales and the gray whales. In addition to the new economic base, they also adopted Siberian armor and the sinew-backed bow, a powerful new implement of war. Expanding across Arctic Canada, the Thule displaced descendants of the earlier Arctic small tool migration, and
You're catching up. Okay. Okay.
Okay, we're good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they displaced the earlier Arctic small tool migration in Alaska, and they took over Yupik-speaking areas to occupy regions that is now Inupiaq. Consequently, Yupik speakers pushed south into the Supiaq region, and the Dena'ina, they're going to move from their interior homeland into the coast. All across Alaska, an era of competition and militancy arose, recalled in Yupik oral tradition as the Bowen Era Wars. It was also called the First War in the World by a Tlingit story. Today, archaeologists, linguists, and oral tradition all helps to shed light on how ancestral people came to Alaska. Together, they also help explain how humans met the challenges of their new environments and succeeded in developing societies, knowledge systems, technologies that were inspired by and finally attuned to living in the far northern world. So the last thing we're going to talk about is adaptation to those distinct ecoregions. Adaptation and ultimately the distinct expressions of today's Alaska Native cultures, they began to materialize when the post-Ice Age climate warmed and the natural system stabilized. At this time, food sources stabilized too, so much so that fishermen and hunters could hone their skills for catching a very specific prey. But seasonal predictability did not necessarily mean that resources were stationary. Over 10,000 years, the resource-rich ecosystems became deeply tied to overlapping cycles of light and dark, the ebbing and flooding of tides, the waxing and waning of moons, and especially the warming and cooling of the seasons. Each plant and animal species made its adjustments to these various cycles so that the migration of birds, the spawning of fish, the movement of caribou, and the fruiting of berries all occur at specific times of the year. Because humans feed on plants and other animals, these first human predators learned to obtain their food and organize their social lives largely according to the cycles by which other species led their lives. Over the centuries, a seasonal pattern of mobility began to dominate the lives of semi-nomadic people moving throughout Alaska. Just as a bear's spring diet of clams and the occasional caribou shifts to salmon and berries during the summer and fall, these hunter-gatherers sought food wherever it was seasonally most concentrated in the ecosystem. Wherever humans expected to find the greatest natural food supply, there they went. Seasonal migration of large base food sources, then they could reside in more permanent locations. They could become a little bit more sedentary. But it wasn't like they could just let it go and relax and do nothing. They had to completely continue to work. Adaptation to their environment meant that Alaska's early people developed technology that suited their needs, while at the same time expressed their keen sense of knowledge of their environment. Fish nets inspired by the spider's web. Snowshoes that imitated the broad feet of ptarmigan floating on soft powder. Hunting boats replicating the streamlined bodies of sea mammals. Tree roots and grasses transformed into watertight basketry. Clothing engineered from hide, furs, fish, skins, feathers, sinew, and gut to provide comfort and protection in all extremes. These cultural products derived from an intimate knowledge of the northern world and a perpetual observation of life and natural processes. Hundreds of generations of innovative knowledge refined Alaska Natives' equipment for survival in demanding boreal and Arctic regions. Over the centuries, the highly developed seasonal pursuit of resources began to influence and shape Alaska Native people's spiritual world of the world. So it wasn't just about economic, it was also about a spiritual connection. And to ensure that animals, berries, or birds chose not to make themselves scarce, Alaska hunter-fisher-gatherers sought to uphold good relationships with the natural world. Although views varied from group to group, most Native people believed that each plant, animal, river, or mountain resided a life force. And in such a view of the world, it was important that hunters and fishermen attained a collaborative relationship with nature, for they believed that all things participated in the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, in which the souls of both animals and humans were deeply connected. This reciprocity was usually achieved through rituals of thanksgiving, ceremony. Yet maintaining spiritual relationship with the resources by no means made ancient people the proverbial children of nature. This was very pragmatic. Alaska Natives lived very much within nature, and they were also directly impacted by it. We have Fish and Game that regulates our relationship to fish and game, to ensure that we don't overfish, we don't overhunt. They had ritual that functioned exactly the same way. So Alaska Natives were experienced, rational hunters and fishers, and throughout long periods of trial and error, or when climate changed and caribou herds and salmon runs declined, they developed cultural mechanisms that controlled abuses like overfishing or hunting or heavy consumption. So rather than romantic, their spiritual relationship was a pragmatic response to ecological systems that constantly fluctuated due to either human or natural causes. Therefore, over the centuries, Alaska Natives managed to maintain a relationship with nature in which culture and environment continue to shape each other together. This, of course, is a lesson we can take to modern times. As the ice age, climate changed, and sustainability fluctuated, indeed, some groups fused together, but then other groups drifted apart. And with people migrating farther and further away, cultural linguistic traits began to separate and change. And when people began to successfully adapt to new environments, well, distinct cultures and identities also took shape. But what's also important is that Alaska Native cultural groups, although distinct, they also share in commonly ingrained values, such as honoring the land and water upon which life depends, having respect and reverence for fish and wildlife, valuing community over the individual, sharing with others, and respecting and learning survival skills and wisdom from elders. Alaska Native cultural worldviews are holistic. Native cultures accept that everything in creation is connected, complex, dynamic, and in a constant state of flux. Alaska Native people have a deep and sophisticated qualitative understanding of the environment in which they live. And this understanding comes from the stories passed down for generations. It also comes from life experience, learning from mentors, beginning at a young age, observations of others in community, and the guidance of others. Today, Alaska is home to over 100,000 indigenous residents, about 15% of the state's present population. They live in almost 300 villages, towns, and cities across the state, and are heirs to 20 different native languages and highly diverse cultural heritages. So who are Alaska Native people today? Well, according to Sherry Beretta, we are the indigenous people of Alaska. Over 10,000 years of our ancestors, we have lived and thrived in one of the harshest areas of the world. We are the last remaining indigenous people in the United States to have never been forcibly removed from our homelands and settled in reservations. We have more than 230 small villages scattered in the largest landmass contained in one state of the Union. The residents of many of these native villages depend on subsistence hunting and fishing to sustain their bodies as well as their traditions and their cultures. Most significantly, after contact, despite societies and beliefs being fundamentally altered, Alaska Native people never move from the margins. And as an Alaska historian, and certainly the things we're going to be discussing in future classes, Alaska Native people engaged in the Russian fur trade. They responded in creative ways to American capitalism. They took a stand against discrimination and racism, and they set a course for self-determination. Today, Alaska Native people represent the most powerful indigenous people on the planet. Alaska Native people were and continue to be central figures in Alaska history to this day. They are not frozen in time, although I think sometimes my volume is. They are not frozen in time, and like the environment in which they live, Alaska Natives, Alaska itself, are always on the move. All right. So, oops, that's the old one.
It was like, okay, you're back.
Okay. So it looks like this is the old question, so sorry about that line that's there. But So the assignment that I have for you guys based on this lecture today and based on what you're going to be assigned for your reading is to read Alaska Natives, Cultures, and Issues. This is a book that was written and designed from an Alaska Native perspective. And just respond to the following questions. Which themes were highlighted in the migrations lecture today that you can connect with the book? And maybe how did some of these articles surprise you and why? And finally, how might you utilize this information in the classroom? And for that, all of these questions, don't hesitate to contact me and talk it through. And we'll, I think that's some ideas that maybe I can help you with. And you might just have some awesome ideas on your own. So I'm going to make sure that I think sometimes the most simplest way is the telephone and email. I know I'm old school, so if you want to contact me that way, you very much are welcome to, and I'll make sure that that information is posted. So you can contact me if you want to just chat and come up with some ideas. Otherwise, that's what I have for you tonight. I want to thank you all, and if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.
Okay. We have two more orders of business before we're done for the day. First of all, I want to give everybody a 10-minute break to stretch out. The 10 minutes really does mean 10 minutes. After that, when we come back at 6:20, I'm going to give you guys a quick tour of the website so that you're comfortable with it. And then we're going to break off into small groups in the breakout room for just a little bit to get acquainted with what that's like and meet your teacher leaders. So at 6:20, I'll start the guided tour. So go stretch out.
Who asked? Just while you guys are stretching, I'll answer some of these questions that I didn't get to. One question had to do with Eskimo and why that word is derogatory. Why is raw meat eater derogatory? And it's not really so much that it was the definition, but it was just a name given by non-Inupiaq or Inuit people. It was given by another group of people who told some explorers from Europe and America what that name was, and then that's how they got the name. So the name came from someplace else, which was a little insulting. So more of it was about that it was put upon them opposed to what it actually meant. So so that's one question. Hope that answered it. Yes, some of you guys are sharing some good personal experiences of that too. So when you were in Anchorage and someone said that was Eskimo, did it matter to them or was it kind of insulting? You may not be there if you are. That's okay. But that's good. I'm glad you brought that up. Well, I appreciate the thanks, you guys. You were a great group. No one fell asleep, right? Let's see. Any other questions out there?
No, it's fine, thanks.
Good job.
It's going good. All right, I'm giving you a 2-minute warning, and then we're going to have 10 minutes. We're going to get out of here at 6:30, and we're just modifying things accordingly. But it is important for you to be comfortable with how to operate on the site. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing the PowerPoint and bring up my screen. So now we're looking at, we'll still got another, I'm not going to start until my clock says 6:20. It says 6:19 because I don't want anybody to miss this. But theoretically, everybody now should see the Alaska Network for Understanding All Human History site, the aniwaning.com site. And you can see the address right up there, aniwaforum.ning.com. Looks like most of you have already joined the site, but there's a 2-phase process. I'm going to wait 1 minute. All right, my completely accurate clock says 6:20. So let's take a quick little tour of the site. If you haven't joined aniwaforum.ning.com, it's a very simple process to join. Once you do, you should be able to come and go from the site without any problems after that. You'll notice when you come to the front page of the site that the very top has a group called Encounters in Alaska Studies. That's us. You're going to click on that, and you'll have the option to join up here. Yours will look a little different because I'm the site administrator, but you'll have the option to join the site. And once you join, you'll see the list of members, and the welcome information is there. You'll find a very up-to-date copy of the course syllabus. You'll find what are substantial postings supposed to be. Whenever you see one of these PDFs, you can download it to your own machine. If you mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little download icon, and you can download it. I have them so that they should pop up in separate windows. We have a number of additional readings and resources available for teachers to look at and share with students besides the required stuff. And in order to access that, you'll see that I have some cool maps that were shared down here, but the best thing is this Google folder. If you click on this link, it'll take you to a Google shared folder, and that shared folder will have a number of resources in it, and you are able to download any of those. And the script from today's PowerPoint will be in here, as well as the PowerPoint itself with all those super cool pictures and a whole bunch of other supplemental materials. This little image I have on the front here shows you where the download icon is and how to close that back out. So we're going to do a little bit of collaborative technology in this course, along with learning about Alaska history. And so that Google folder will be a really rich resource area for you. The last thing that is really important you know about, let me go back to the discussion area. The last thing is, where do you share your discussion assignment? Well, I'm guessing you'll notice where it says migration discussion questions that might be a good spot. These are the 3 questions that Katie had on the last slide of her presentation. And they relate to the Alaska Native Cultures and Issues book that hopefully you all have at this point in time. And we'll flash that up in a minute. I don't have any video right now. But these are the questions, and basically to reply, you will just go post down in this little box. You can stretch that box and make it bigger. And it's just like a word processor in there. If you want to do your typing in a word processing and then copy and paste into there, that works fine too. You can add links, you can add photos. It's pretty nice. You can even upload files in your replies. But the bottom line is the migrations discussion question is where the first assignment discussion is being held. And I'm going to flip back to see if anybody has any questions at this time. That's pretty much what you need to know as far as our website. This Aniwa Encounters in Alaska Studies group is the home base for all of our class actions and activities, and you are going to be visiting it a lot, so you might as well just bookmark it. And that's all I have, but now I got to find my way back to
Hey, John, could you show one more time where the Google Docs are found? How do we get to the Google Docs section?
Sure. From the, let me go back there. Yeah, as a matter of fact, you guys, if you just, I moved back so I could see the chat screen, but if you just want to ask questions while I'm with audio while I'm sharing my screen, it'll make it a lot easier for me to answer your questions. So I'm going back to, if I go to the main page, you'll notice that from the main page, the Encounters in Alaska Studies group is right there. Now, right in that welcome thing, there's a little this is going to be where the very most important central documents are accessible. But from the, and you know what, I think I'm going to add that folder here, because additional resources, that folder is linked right here, but I'm going to put it up in a central location too. So from additional readings and resources for session 1, there's a link to this folder. But what I'll do is I'll put it right up where you don't even have to go in there to get it, because I just built this today and it looks like it's going to be super useful. So we're just going to put it where it's even easier to get at. But you can get at it right this minute from to the resources on the session 1.
Okay, thanks.
So, any questions before we go to the last couple seconds here? Any other questions about the website? It's pretty straightforward, except finding my way back isn't. I don't need that anyway. I'm going to stop sharing. All right. You got any final words? You can turn on the mic there. Yeah. You just turn on Katie's mic. I'll turn it on for you if you can't. Okay, you're unmuted.
Okay, I just want to tell you that I'm sorry we ran late
today and it made it so we didn't get to get in our breakout groups. But what we'll try to do is start with the big breakout groups when we come back on February 9th for our next session. So you'll get to meet your teacher leaders and have a conversation about it. But be sure and read the Alaska Native Culture and Issues book and respond to Katie's prompts and be part of that discussion. You need to answer those questions before the next meeting because that's the assignment that is tied to your grade. Do you have any questions for me before we go?
Hands up. Hands up. Go ahead, Chuck.
Just curious about the support readings in the bottom right-hand corner with the Kennecott and influenza epidemic. Are those for our own enjoyment?
Yes, those are for your own edification. Katie drew from a lot of that information to create the next PowerPoint. It's not required reading, but there's some really cool stuff there.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Well, this was an okay session. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, everybody. Wish we would have had time to get to the breakout sessions, but it was good.
Thank you very much, you guys. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you back here next time.